Hello, so yeah, I'm Kevin, and I'm going to be talking about Chris's paper, which is on American state-sponsored terrorism. First off, I'm liking the topic that you picked. It's different, not something I was really expecting to be talked about, even though we have talked about it in our class. And it's something that's often not looked upon, kind of overlooked. So as we start your paper, first thing that caught my eye was
right at your intro, you say, in recent years, the U.S. has began acting on this power while condemning any group or person who may challenge it. Nice hook, line, and sinker to get somebody going into the book, into your paper, getting people to want to continue reading, for sure. And then, you even go further with, going aggressive and just, putting it out there, trying to get, to draw the people in, and you talk about how the U.S. is becoming aggressive in its approach in international affairs, using state-sponsored terrorism as a means of achieving political goals. I just loved how you did your intro. And then as we move on to the actual first topic that you actually pick, which was U.S. Use of state-sponsored terrorism in response to 9/11. And you go right off to, in response to 9/11, the very first thing you bring up is the Bullhorn speech, where he's on top of the rubble and he says, "I hear you, the rest of the world hears you, and the people who knock down these buildings will hear all of us soon." And then you automatically go right down onto the actual fact that, he didn't actually have to threaten anybody. He didn't have to go and say, "We're going to come and get you because you hit us, you smacked us, so we're going to hit you even harder." And then, which I also thought, here's something you could do, Chris, is you could maybe make the connection with the language that terrorists use and connection with President Bush's little Bullhorn speech here. How you could take a speech from Bin Laden on how he threatens America, and you could immediately put those two connections together and say, why is one correct and why is one incorrect? And I think it'd just be something that would really help your argument here in the fact of the speech being a threat, and put two and two together. And then we go on to talk about Saddam in Iraq and our use of state-sponsored terrorism in there, in which Bush, all he had to do was give an ultimatum to Assad at that point. And he could have completely avoided the whole situation, but ended up not. And then you also talk about the violent method of shock and awe, where we're supposed to be just targeting leadership, but we actually end up targeting civilian things too, and in which we hit electric fields and water lines, which at that point you sit there and go, we're messing up people's lives in the civilian population, and you kind of have to sit there and at that point wonder, make people wonder, man, we really did some messed up things at this point. And then I thought another thing you could do real well here is, draw upon the fact that we let terrorist countries like Saudi Arabia, kind of have free control over themselves, but we're, really hard on Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan. But, Saudi Arabia has, statistically, I believe, more terrorists in it. I think if you find something along those lines in a source, be a great little thing to have in there. And then as we move on to the next section is U.S. governmental support of known terrorist organizations. First thing that came to my mind was the fact that we provided weapons, money to Al-Qaeda in the 80s to fight off the Russians in Afghanistan. And
immediately you went right to that too, and I was like, man, we're thinking same page here, because when you give that nice little header, not header there, but the topic that you're going to cover, and then you're sitting there and you're thinking, oh, what is he going to be possibly talking about, and putting two together was really nice. First thing I thought is, when you were saying about the fighters, the Syrian fighters, and the atrocities that they committed, tell us what those are, and give the examples of blank, blank, and blank. And you did really well on this, actually, further down on the paper when you talked about the Nicaraguan rebels and what they did, and if you would have done the same way with the rebels, I think it'd be perfect right there. You use examples with the Nicaraguan rebels, like they raided an oil facility, they put a town up in flames and it was engulfed, making us think and not leaving things up to just atrocities. Tell us what those atrocities were, because don't leave it just up to interpretation at this point. And then the next thing I was thinking is, you also were saying that we're supporting the rebel movement in Syria. Are you talking about, like, the Kurds or another rebel organization, or are you talking about ISIS? Making that clarification, just making sure that the reader knows what you're talking about, for sure. And then we also talk about stuff that's backfiring the U.S. because of our support of Al-Qaeda. They have our guns, the vehicles, the ammo that we provide them, the training that we provided them, and now that we're having to fight them, we're kind of like sitting here like, man, we're kind of foolish. And then you go on talking about the complex situation.
In Syria, power, and he's just not the nicest guy in the world. And then you also have ISIS, and then Assad sitting here saying, I'm the only choice you really have. It's either me or ISIS, and I'm the better of the two. I'm the lesser of two evils. Which, at that point, you only pick your fate if that's the fate you pick. And then you talk about Kalik, who is the leading, reporter on American state-sponsored terrorism, which is, great to hear that, there's actually a reporter that's actually hitting on these topics, on things that we're doing, and for sure. And then you also talk about the divisions of fighting between the Kurds, the non-Kurds, the Sunnis. There's another one that I will not even try to pronounce because I'll probably say it wrong. And then also the separation of religions like Christianity, Islam. It's really flying. And then as we move on to the next section, U.S. State-sponsored terror in Nicaragua. And, you talk about the mining operation, the attack on the oil fields really well, and our involvement with their elections, which kind of, it's probably not nice of us at all to be getting involved in their elections. It's fly. And also, we were getting involved because, we didn't want the Soviets involved with them because it's so close to home. But also that doesn't give you a reason to interfere with their elections and, completely mess up their democratic, their democratically government in this situation. So, you kind of have to condone it at that point. One thing I'd like to, you say that, the U.S. government was brought on charges at that point. You actually stated here on page 10, in 1984, Nicaragua took the United States to the International Court of Justice in the Netherlands to bring charges upon the U.S. for mining the harbors of Nicaragua and attacking Nicaraguan oil facilities, upon other smaller charges. Were those charges actually,
prosecuted, or were they kind of just dropped like they normally are? Just would like to, see if that's something that would be in there too. And then, maybe also put in Cuba here about, our involvement with, South and Central America. And Cold War relations at the time, weren't the best thing, and we just didn't want the Soviet Union close by. And then we move on to your conclusion. I like to say your conclusion is a victory lap. It's a way to tell why everything you've said in your paper is important. And
you immediately go on to say, you go back and hit all your topics that you've hit, and then easily build it, tie it up real nicely done. First thing I was sitting here thinking is, I loved your world police comment, which is something we do a lot. We, ever since post World War II, we're getting involved in other countries' issues for our own goals or for other countries' goals. And then I just loved your last two lines that you used. I thought, just nice ending to the whole paper that you put together, where you say, instead, the United States government often works in its sole best interest, even if it means utilizing covert state-sponsored terrorism abroad on a consistent basis. It is important to realize that both sides of a conflict need to be equally represented in an argument in order to make a determination about who is truly right. I thought that was a perfect way to wrap up your paper completely and honestly. And then I was also talking about, I love your examples of, how we fund, supply, manipulate speeches, and the use of military forces, for our state-sponsored terrorism. The last one, military forces easily, recognizable, but a lot of things that can be thrown underneath the rug, like funding and supplies, are not as often looked upon, but are a big factor, back onto Russia, when we were supplying Al Qaeda, and now they're, fighting us, and we're just like, well, that's probably wasn't the brightest idea at the moment. And then I thought, last but not least, you did a great job on your bib. The bib was real nicely done. No errors I've seen in it with how it was structured whatsoever. So I thought you did a really nice job on your paper, Chris. So good job. Thank you.